gentlemen, welcome to Annesley Markdale. We hope you thoroughly enjoy tonight's performance, and to make your enjoyment complete, we strongly recommend you have a seat cushion from our friendly front-of-house staff. There are 2 wheelchair-accessible washrooms on this level, adjacent to the main entrance, and there are additional facilities on the church's lower level. In the highly unlikely event of an emergency, there are exits in each corner of the sanctuary leading to sidewalk, garden, and Highway 10. But please use the highway side doors only in an emergency. Lastly, the usual friendly reminder and admonition about phones and other noisemakers. Thank you. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, 6 Nations of the Grand River, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Wyandot peoples, on whose traditional territories we gather and whose ancestors signed treaties with our ancestors. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of the 2026 speaker series from the Friends of the Museum. Before we begin, I personally want to acknowledge that we gather tonight on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the 3 Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And further, we give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. Miigwech, and thank you. I'm Kate Russell. Many of you may know me from my time as curator at the South Grey Museum, now an updated and rebranded Grey Highlands Museum. Back in the day, we determined to create a friends group. And I must say, our community is enriched for the efforts of many volunteers over the years, most notably Barry Penhale and Jane Gibson, who seem to know everyone. Their connections have enlivened many versions of the speaker's stage, welcoming many amazing authors, adventurers, and interesting characters over the years since forming the Friends of the Museum in 2013. Today, the Friends are very lucky to have Catherine and Steve Plenner as longtime volunteers, still supporting the speaker series as well as the annual Agnes MacPhail celebrations. We enjoyed it just this past March here in this very venue, and the annual Canada Day celebration breakfast. Stuart Halliday, one of the most steadfast supporters of the museum, is here tonight, as is museum board member Janet Carson. Of course, no event like this can really shine without the professional skills of Tim Riley up there in the gallery. He is not only managing this live event, he's also streaming it online and recording it for posterity. Thanks, Tim, for your efforts and with the beautiful Annesley United Church to host Middle Grey Arts and Heritage. This space is a true blessing for our community and all those who venture together here. Community sponsors have helped over the years with everything from silent auction items, door prizes, and the usually present Sean Ankerman, he sends his regrets about tonight, of Highland Grounds, offering up coffee and tea for events. Tonight's event has the added benefit of support of Stephen's Restaurant. On a personal note, I'd like to say how wonderful it is that tonight's speaker is amplifying a message about ecotourism and the need to really understand visitor impact on wilderness areas. This is a cause close to my heart, and those volunteers like Stacey Howe, recently recognized on this stage for her efforts in creating Beaver Valley Destination Stewardship, a grassroots group you may learn more about by going to thebeautifulbeavervalley.ca. We're all about community storytelling and invite you to join the collaborative journey we've been on with our Indigenous friends and the volunteer-run Osprey Museum. We will be getting into citizen science this year, so follow along for your own ecotourism adventure. So, on with the show. Barry and Jane may not be able to attend these events, but their presence is always part of the production. So, with thanks to Barry, I offer up this introduction for tonight's speaker. In an age when present-day technology, for good or bad, can make an individual famous in record time, our special guest presenter, Hap Wilson, paddled and portaged for 50-plus years before becoming a highly recognized living outdoor legend. Often dubbed the real McCoy, the newbies in today's outdoor world have a lot of catching up to do to ever come close to matching Hap's canoeing experiences, let alone his prominence as a master trail builder. Expedition leader, river conservationist, co-founder of the organization Earth Roots, much admired self-taught artist, Hap has been one very busy guy, beginning as a young fellow when he began an association with the Ontario Northland and a life aligned with nature and the Canadian wilderness. Tonight, throughout his presentation concerning ecotourism, we will travel with Hap and inhabit briefly the magnificent Temagami Wilderness, area that won his heart as a young canoeist, and today is the site of a growing business known as Cabin Falls Eco Lodge. Hap's many admirers first encountered the site in his popular book, The Cabin, an early book that was followed by many more he has authored since, with 3 new books ahead with 3 different publishers. I'm envious. Hap and his wife, Andrea, that's Andrea, supposed to be at the book table, but over there beside her husband, will soon be heading back to open up once again Cabin Falls Eco Lodge. No small annual feat considering its isolated location. But fortunately, we have them here this evening, and it's with great pleasure that on behalf of the Friends of the Museum, I join with those present in welcoming the remarkable Hap Wilson, outdoorsman extraordinaire.
Wow, did you say old McCoy or real McCoy? I can't remember. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, thanks first and foremost to my old friends, good friends, Barry and Jane, for sure. We go back a long way. And I learned a lot. He's been my mentor, believe it or not. He is older than me, a little by a few years. But wonderful people. And thank you, Tim. Hey, Tim up there did a fine job. And I was telling Tim that this is one of the finest venues. He's got such a good system here that's worked out. And that's the one thing that a speaker enjoys the most is when everything works. I remember when we had slides, 35 millimeter slides and slide carousels, and the bulbs would burn out halfway through a slideshow. And then that would pretty much end the show. Things have changed a lot, and this is something I'll be showing tonight with the tourism, ecotourism, and tourism values. I'd also like to thank Kate for sure, certainly the United Church here, the Beaver Valley Watershed Initiative, which is great because all of these smaller community watershed projects and working with First Nations is so important for our future. And I always give away a couple of books at the beginning of my talk, but you have to answer a skill testing question. So the first one, no, you can't use your phones. You can't Google and look for the answer. So you have to shout out. My hearing is terrible, but the first book I'm going to give away is A River of Fire, a real-life adventure story. That's been very popular. First question, and you know what? I'm going to wear my glasses because not only is my hearing bad these days, my eyesight's not all that great either. All right. Okay, which country has the world's fresh water, and what percentage?
Canada, 8%.
How much?
80?
Nope. It's Canada, for sure. Any other guesses? Just shout it out. No. 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 It's yes, 20%. That's your book. Okay, good stuff. And the other one is an apocalyptic novel that I wrote, my last book. It's been well received as well. It's also a survival guide and a love story. So might find that interesting. So next question is, what's Canada's national drink? Sorry? No, it's not. This is going to be a tough one, I know. It's actually alcohol. No. No. It's an alcoholic drink. I'll give you a hint. Et tu brute. Who said that? All right, so it's a Caesar. Now, what are the ingredients? All right, close enough. This is for you. So this is tough for me because these shows are sometimes 35, 40 minutes. This one, I pared it down to about 3.5 hours. So, no, it won't be that long, believe me. But it's tough because I have to cram 50 some odd years into an hour's show, picking out slides that really fit the program, and keeping things, doing the research and that. And I love doing this, and have great people on these audiences. And I really appreciate you coming out tonight. So now Tim this is beautiful because I just have to point this thing up there. I don't want to hit anybody with the laser beam here. So modern tourism, how many types of tourism do you think there are besides ecotourism? Not quite. So, and I like this slide because you try to figure that one out. So, but it fits the program, keeping ecotourism believable. And we've kind of strayed from the organic roots and the meanings of ecotourism over the last 2, 3, 4 decades. And I'm going to go into more detail with that. Tourism has changed. I mean, you look at this picture, you could call this maybe hunting, fishing. He has a rifle in the front of the canoe. I remember when I first started canoeing back, a long time ago, even in the late 60s, I portaging on a portage in Temagami, and you would pass somebody who was still wearing a sidearm, and quite often, is that better? Okay. And he'd be wearing a sidearm, which was quite legal. So, most of these people who would wear a sidearm were Americans, and they were afraid of bears. So, but things have changed a lot over the last few decades in tourism values. I'm going to, and Kate mentioned that we run an eco lodge in Temagami. It was built in 1931, and in the last 15 years, we've added on a couple of extra cabins. And I just want to start with something kind of fun. And this is a small video I put together for just so people understand what it's like to run an eco lodge and what goes into bringing in supplies in a remote area. Blackfly season as well. Okay, you have to be a little bit crazy, not just dedicated, but certainly I have a good bow partner coming down the rapids, and that was a bit of an easy run, wasn't it? Yeah, we still had 2 portages to carry the gear in. So it's a lot of work, a lot of dedication. Certainly, we try as hard as we can to stand true to ecotourism values. And this is the best definition that I've come across. Can everybody read that? Okay. I'll just read that loud anyway. The International Ecotourism Society, you still hear that okay, Andrea? Which plays a strong role within the United Nations, offers a hybrid definition of ecotourism. Ecotourism is a form of tourism inspired primarily by the natural history of an area, including its indigenous cultures. The ecotourist visits relatively undeveloped areas in the spirit of appreciation, participation, and sensitivity. The ecotourist practices a non-consumptive use of wildlife and natural resources and contributes to the visited area through labor or financial means aimed at directly benefiting the conservation of the site and the economic well-being of the local residents. Ecotourism also implies a managed approach by the host country or region which commits itself to establishing and maintaining the sites with the participation of local residents, marketing them appropriately, enforcing regulations, and using the proceeds of the enterprise to fund the area's land management as well as community development. Now that's a lot. I mean, you could pare that down to a couple of sentences, but that's the most descriptive, purest form of what ecotourism is. Types of tourism. There are more types of tourism that, thank you. Types of tourism. You'd be surprised at what people pay money to go out and do. Adventure tourism, you've all heard of this, and it fits a lot of categories. The adventure travel is a type of niche tourism involving exploration of travel in an unusual, exotic, remote, or wilderness destination. Travelers are highly engaged in involvement with activities that include perceived and possible actual risk, and potentially requiring specialized skills and physical exertion. Adventure tourism has grown in recent decades as tourists seek out of the ordinary types of vacations, but measurement of market size and growth is hampered by the lack of a clear operational definition. According to the US-based Adventure Travel Trade Association, adventure travel may be any tourist activity that includes the following 3 components: a physical activity, a cultural exchange, and connection with nature. And that's one of the hard things about different tourism types is how do we define that? Each tourism type is different from the next. And quite often there's a cross-pollination with one type of tourism with another. Cultural tourism, probably one of the largest components of tourism, generally speaking. Cultural tourism is a type of travel focused on experience a destination's unique heritage, arts, traditions, and lifestyle. It moves beyond traditional sightseeing to create deeper, authentic connections with local communities through activities like visiting historical sites, attending festivals, sampling local cuisine, and exploring museums. Urban exploration. Anybody heard of urban exploration? It's an interesting one. It's new, fairly new in the last, say, 10, 15 years. Urban exploration tourism, or urbex, is the act of visiting and documenting abandoned, hidden, or restricted man-made structures, such as factories, hospitals, tunnels, and rooftops. It focuses on exploring the beauty of decay and historical sites not typically open to the public. Most of this is illegal as well, but that's part of the adventure, right? No risk, no adventure. It focuses on exploring the beauty of decay and historical sites not typically open to the public. Key risks include legal issues like trespassing and physical dangers such as structural failures. And if anybody looks at YouTube, YouTube videos are the thing of today. And it's a lot of extreme of this type of tourism. Ethnotourism. Ethnocultural tourism, also known as ethnic or indigenous tourism, involves traveling to experience the unique lifestyles, traditions, arts, and heritage of specific ethnic communities. It focuses on immersive interactions, such as visiting villages, participating in traditional ceremonies, and buying local crafts, aiming to foster cultural exchange and support local economies. The Germans in particular love Canada's First Nations and certainly visiting a lot of the Canadian First Nations villages and partaking in ceremonies, sweat lodges and such. Ghetto tourism. Ghetto tourism, commonly known as slum tourism, favela tourism, or poverty tourism, involves organized visits to impoverished urban areas, such as townships in South Africa, favelas in Brazil, or slums in India. It is a controversial niche market where tourists explore disadvantaged neighborhoods to witness raw, authentic living conditions, often driven by curiosity or a desire to understand social challenges. Extreme tourism. You see a lot of this on social media, on YouTube channels. China, for example, has a lot of this type of trail system. I don't know how many would do that trail there in here. Not too many, I don't think. Extreme tourism is a niche, high-risk travel sector focused on dangerous locations, deserts, caves, war zones, or adrenaline-pumping activities like volcano boarding, deep-sea diving, and space travel. It overlaps with adventure travel, but features higher risk, requiring significant physical effort and specialized gear, driven by the search for adrenaline and unique experiences. Disaster tourism. Has anybody heard of disaster tourism? I've only recently discovered this as a form of tourism. Disaster tourism is the practice of traveling to locations recently or historically impacted by natural or man-made disasters such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or industrial accidents. Considered a subset of dark tourism, it involves visiting sites of devastation to witness the aftermath, educate oneself, or support recovery, though it often sparks ethical debates regarding voyeurism and exploitation. Accessible tourism. As a trail builder, we put trails in, a particular trail in Penetanguishene, I like to call it Penetanguishene, but Penetanguishene, and we had to build it to a certain grade, and they had a person who had a mobility issue, who was wheelchair bound, and she would come out and test the trail grade, and if it was okay, if she could go up and down that grade, then that was fine. We didn't have to add gravel or do anything with our trail system. But I've known in the past that people with physical issues, disabilities, certain disabilities, don't want it too easy. They don't want a trail that's really easy or paved. This is the kind of trail that they don't want something that's too easy that sort of highlights their physical disability. So, and I've noticed that in trail building is that grade is important. Obviously, they have to go back up quite often, some of these grades, but they want challenge as well. And I remember a couple of times I took visually impaired people on canoe trips, and so that's something that is not out of bounds for people with certain disabilities. There's certain things that you have to be wary of, and certainly a lot more care given to specific clients who have these type of mobility issues. Accessible tourism is the ongoing effort to ensure destinations, products, and services are accessible to all people, regardless of physical limitations, disabilities, or age. It aims to provide barrier-free, independent, and dignified experiences, including transportation, accommodation, and information for seniors, families with young children, and people with disabilities. Overland travel, that's cross-pollination of different types, typically adventure travel, hiking, traveling in particular groups. That's something that's fairly popular as well in today's market. So I'm going to get, and typically I don't like to read from a script, but I've got so much information here to, to update modern tourism, as I call it, and a lot of things like greenwashing, for example, and the pitfalls and perils too, especially in marketing tourism. And I'll go into some more detail on from my personal experiences. So greenwashing, has everybody heard the term greenwashing? The act of providing the public or investors with misleading or outright false information about the environment, impact of a company's products and operations. And you see it a lot today, greenwashing. And I'll go into more detail with that. So I have, I'm just going to go through the things that affect culture and tourism, which are very important if you're in the marketing business. Jobs versus the environment. You'll see that a lot in the logging industry, mining industry, is that trying to protect a particular area. Of course, you're up against small communities. It could be an industrial town like Temagami is an example. That always hits a wall when when you're dealing with several different logging companies or mining companies, where they will say, well, you're going to take that much away from our inventory for logging for so many years, so you have to give us something. So, and if we can't have what we want, we've got to lay off a lot of people. So, and that's been happening more so in the last, say, 2-3 decades. And if you remember back in the days, 1980s, Temagami was a big issue. It's a global issue. Bob Rae, if you remember, everybody remember Bob Rae, who was the Premier of Ontario. The year before he became Premier, he was out on our blockade in Temagami. And of course, our own group, this is one of our campaigns and down at Queen's Park in Toronto. Climate change has a huge effect on tourism values, cultural values, and where to go. Weather has made a lot of impact on timing and places to go. A lot more like El Nino, for example, creating more violent storms, which has an effect on if you're doing wilderness travel, even not wilderness travel, but group travel to distant places. And you're affected by the weather more so now than in past years. Even canoeing, we get, we have days and days of heavy rains, and flooding is occurring more nowadays than ever before. Also a change in demographics. There used to be mostly in the outdoor field, for example, it was a man's world. It was a place where boys were sent to go to boys' camps. They weren't co-ed camps. Co-ed camps came into existence probably in the 70s. You think the 70s, Andrea? Like Waban, Keewaydin. They were traditional boys' camps. Keewaydin is the oldest boys' camp in North America. And they weren't co-ed until late 1970s, early 1980s. And now you're You've got women's organizations, women's group canoe trip expeditions happening today. So the demographics now is, I think it was like 60-40 now, 60% men, 40% women partaking in these types of adventures. So psychological, men are different than women. I've been guiding expeditions for more than 4 decades, and I certainly know the difference how men react in wilderness situations to how women react in certain situations. I always like to use this as a descriptive. Men tend to not handle situations as well as women can. Women are more logical. Protecting wilderness, wildlife, and watersheds. And like the Beaver Valley watershed, I mentioned it's so important, these small communities, and on a larger scale. Andrew and I have been up in the tree line area in northern Manitoba, mapping out the North Seal River, for example, which is now in the Saese Dene initiative for a tribal park to take over the management of a whole watershed. And the Seal River is the 4th largest river. It's an undammed river in Manitoba. And we find a lot of archaeology on our trips, and we just hand all that information over to the Dene people. And I mapped out, for 4 years, I mapped out 19 rivers in Manitoba. I was working with Canada Parks and the tourism ministry in Manitoba. And most of these rivers that I had picked, these wilderness rivers, were threatened in some way, from from river diversion, damming, hydro lines, road building, and that was something that I've used in my books a lot. Is the guidebooks, for example, turned out to be a great environmental tool, is to bring awareness to these watersheds that are so important to protect. The industry knows what they're worth. When you put a hydro dam, they know what the power output will be. Logging companies know the price of stumpage fees and the tree value. And when we started in the environment business, we approached environmentalism on an emotional psychological and more of an emotional plea to save old growth forests. And of course that didn't fly until years later. Then we adopted more of an ecotourism approach. What's that forest worth over a long term? And it was hard to get that across to developers, bureaucrats, and governments. It took years. So I got to get into this, otherwise we're going to be here till midnight. We got a lot of ground to cover. I can't stress this enough for people in the marketing business and tourism developers that, and I talked to Kate earlier about, we were putting trails in for the JW Marriott Resort Hotel in Muskoka. And I remember the excavation for the basement of the hotel was in a deer habitat. And I went to the construction manager and I said, "Do you have permission to dig this big hole for this hotel?" And the construction manager looked at me and said, "Yeah, we own the property." I said, "But do you have permission?" "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, you need to bring in a shaman." And they don't like the word shaman, because they like the word healer of the upright life, because that's a white term, shaman, and it's not considered. It's almost a derogatory term. But we brought in Wes Wheatung from the Shawanaga Reserve, and he did a land ceremony, and that was built into the story of the hotel, and so that kind of thing is extremely important when you're marketing something. You don't just go and then take down a beautiful forest, pine forest, and without, first, well, what was that land before we were here? Who occupied that land? And it's such a simple thing to do. In our expeditions, we stop in at villages and we ask permission to paddle through their land. And often they say, yeah, we'll get together, we'll get everybody in the community center, which happened at Lac Brochet in Manitoba, and the whole town came out and celebrated our trip because they'd never seen paddlers through that area ever. And we were the first ones through there. And it's a very remote, there's no roads to this Dene village. And so everybody in the village showed up, and the drummers came and passed the talking stick, and we thanked them. I think we gave them a gift of tobacco. And so we've done this on several occasions, and they love it. And a lot of people don't, they just paddle through, don't talk to anybody. You might go to the northern store, spend a few bucks, and then run off. But I'll tell you, it makes a world of difference, not just to the person who's paddling through there, but to the village people. And they have a better trust with the paddling tourists, for example. So supporting First Nation and environmental issues, one and the same thing, really. It's so united in importance. Artificial intelligence, AI. Anybody heard of that by chance? Yeah, whether it's a good thing. How many people think it's a good thing? I don't think. Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's probably good for some things. I think most people are afraid of it because it can take over your life. And the thing is, we don't know what to believe. We don't know what news to believe anymore, except the mainstream news that we're so used to. Probably still okay, but if we're getting our news from, say, Instagram or Facebook, which a lot of people do, a lot of that's artificial intelligence. So it's affecting what people see, how people interpret, and tourism establishments are doing the same thing. So we really don't know what's real, and it's getting more difficult to understand. Lack of duty of care. I'm just going to tell you a quick story. It's a long story, but I'll try to shorten it. Andrea and I were looking at the Mississauga River for one of our expedition trips. And so we were paddling out. We saw a search and rescue crew land just downstream from where we were having lunch. And we thought it was just some kind of practice or that they were just doing it. And then we got in the canoe again and we paddled the rapid that was right in front of the search and rescue guys. And we didn't realize until we got out to Matisse, the town, and found out that we actually paddled over the body of a canoeist who had capsized and was stuck in the rocks underneath the water. And so that got me thinking about, I went on another trip and I found out there was 2 Americans from Ohio had drowned at Thunderhouse Falls. And I'm hearing about all these deaths on this one river. And so I actually went and started researching, and I found out, I went to the coroner's office in Toronto to do the research, and I found out that there were over 3 dozen deaths on that river in a 14-year period, an average of 2 deaths per year. And a lot of that same year, the Ontario government and the federal government put out ads in national magazines in both the United States and Canada. And Mississauga River at that time was a provincial waterway park and a heritage river. So the ads were getting people to, let's go paddle the Mississauga River, where you can paddle from Lake Superior to James Bay and only cross 2 highways. And of course, what they were doing, basically, they were selling a product that was not safe. They hadn't done the research, they hadn't updated maps. Americans and Europeans were coming with topographic maps, and topographic maps were not intended for recreational use. They were for government use and for military purposes, not for canoeing. Well, there were, I think, about 30 mistakes on the topographical maps, marking portages in the wrong place, rapids that weren't marked, waterfalls that were marked in the wrong place, and a portage at Thunderhouse Falls that you couldn't get to. And that was because the cartographer marked it arbitrarily on the wrong side of the river. 5 people died there. 5 people. And so it turned out that there were 17 deaths could have been prevented had they had a proper guidebook. So we published the guidebook, the next couple of years. And since then, 1990, the guidebook's been out since 1994. Not one person has drowned in that river since the guidebook came out. But the case in point here is lack of duty of care. The provincial government and the federal government could have been sued for millions by some of those people who, and I went to lawyers and they said, absolutely, those people could have sued the government because we understood that, well, we came to Canada and we figured you guys had your act together, but we used the topographic maps and it showed the portage right there. And we tried to get to it and 2 of our buddies died trying to get there. And so lack of duty of care is so important in marketing. Greenwashing, here we go. Tourism as varnish. And I'm just going to go through this and I'm going to be reading off script. I might get off topic, but my wife's going to go like this if I get off topic. And I don't want this to drag on for too long. Ecotourism faces critical challenges, primarily balancing nature conservation with economic growth, managing overcrowding and combating greenwashing, where operators misrepresent sustainability. Major issues include habitat disruption, economic leakage away from local communities, cultural erosion, and weak regulatory enforcement. I put this picture up here because I remember coming down with a group down the Big East River in early, I was in spring, it was like April or May, coming down river, several rapids, beautiful little river in Muskoka. And I could hear this, vroom, 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 vroom. And half a dozen of these things were going upriver. And when we got down to the bridge and the takeout point, and there was a van there, and it said, the best eco-adventures in Canada. And I'm thinking, really? This is some of the things that we run into a lot these days. Modern tourism is attracted to the last untouched corners of the earth in staggering numbers. And Canada is one of 4 countries in the world that has vast wilderness areas. And of course, if you look at wilderness as a commodity, which we do now because we had to commodify wilderness instead of hugging a tree, we had to come up with a dollar value for why is this more important than logging and the short-term profits. And I'll give another example here. Across South Africa, ecotourism subjects the land and surrounding communities to heavy exploitation of resources, especially water. And we know the United States wants Canadian water. That's another thing that we're concerned about right now. This is a divergence away from responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of local peoples, and involves interpretation and education. The establishment of protected areas in the 1800s was an inkling of ecotourism. Though an inspiring concept, national parks in southern Africa were originally established as game preserves during the colonial era, evicted the people who had been historically dependent on that land and its natural resources. Those who stayed were subjected to game and gun laws, license quotas, effectively cutting off vital food sources. Today, protected areas are increasingly managed for the benefit of the private sector, governments, and tourists, rather than local communities. Governments and the private sector rake in as much as 25% of the GDP in certain developing countries. In turn, communities have become increasingly impoverished and resentful. And that resentment, I think if people remember, last summer, Spain and Italy, for example, were very angry because of the change in their cultural habits. Tourism was a detriment because it changed the whole, their living conditions, again, their rental rates went up, food was more expensive, and so on and so forth. So they were angry and they didn't want tourists coming to Italy or Spain. Because the regulation of ecotourism may be poorly implemented, ecologically destructive greenwashing operations like underwater hotels, helicopter tours, and wildlife theme parks can be categorized as ecotourism, which also includes canoeing, camping, photography, and wildlife observation. Failure to abide by the tenets of ecotourism makes it hard on the bona fide operators of ecotourism. The problems with defining ecotourism have often led to confusion among tourists and academics and marketing agents. And there is a trend towards the commercialization of tourism schemes disguised as sustainable, nature-based, and environmentally friendly ecotourism. These schemes are environmentally destructive, economically exploitive, and culturally insensitive. Morally, they mislead the tourist and manipulate their concerns for the environment. All this is a testament to the high profits associated with being labeled as ecotourism. An ecotourist is different from a tourist in the sense that he or she is mindful of the environment and its sustainability. I'd like to touch on the civilizing influence of culture as it is relevant to a broader picture of tourism development. And in Canada, perhaps globally, on a global perspective, the fundamental purpose of art and culture hasn't really changed at all. But as a society, we have. So what is culture? And well, that didn't come out of my thing there. It was a battery. So what is culture, and why do we feel it is so important these days? There is so much we don't know or understand. Art, in its many forms, is a key component of culture, certainly, and who better to explain it to us but another well-known artist, Pablo Picasso. And he says, if everybody is looking for it, then nobody is finding it. If we were cultured, we would not be conscious of lacking culture. We would regard it as something natural and would not make so much fuss about it. And if we knew the real value of this word, we would be cultured enough not to give it so much importance. Fair enough. Perhaps we lack the ability to incorporate culture deep enough into our everyday environment in an industry that renders culture as a casual form of entertainment. The tensions and political situation around the world also does not help instill a sense of global security. Politics, too. Well, I just made this picture is the pictographs on Artery Lake, on the Blood Vein River, one of our favorite rivers for paddling. These are sacred sites. At one time, you were not supposed to even visit these sites without express permission from the shaman, healer of the upright life, and certainly not without leaving some kind of offering. Tobacco is the most common. I was talking to some canoeists, and I write this into all my books. I said, you know, be cautious when you travel to these and you see these pictographs. It's like walking into a church. With respect, you don't splash water on it. You don't touch them, and you just you can leave some kind of. And I always suggest tobacco. I remember talking with one girl canoeist, and he said, "Well, we didn't have tobacco, so we left some Tabasco." I said, "Well, it's an offering. It's something that you left there and you gave in." In respect to these sites. And this is part of and because of the Anishinaabe, in particular, a lot of these Algonquian nations don't have a written history. They have an oral history and a pictorial history like these pictograph sites. Pictographs, petroglyphs, pictoforms, all of these things. These are all teaching sites. And we really don't understand enough of that. We don't understand how's that paint still on these rocks after a couple thousand years? I mean, we can go to Home Depot and buy the best paint there and paint our docks or our houses, and that paint's worn off in a few years, right? A couple of years, 2 or 3, 4 years, we have to repaint again. What's the bonding agent to these rocks? And I remember doing my research. I was living in a cabin on Lake Superior, writing my Missinaibi book, and I spent a lot of time at the Michipicoten Reserve, going through all of their files and historical records, I came across a lot of stories. I talked to one of the elders there. Well, what's the science behind the pictographs? Why, what's the science? What keeps all those paints on that rock for so long under such harsh elements? And he laughed and he said, "It's not science at all. It's magic." He said, "This is where the Memagwishawak live, the stone people, and the shaman will come, and he will, through ceremony, he will conjure up the stone people. They will come up and offer some blood to the shaman, and mixed with some red ochre that may have been bartered for something else, and that mixed with ceremony and the blood of the Memagwishawak is what bonds that paint to the rock." And whether they haven't come up with a scientific rationale for the longevity of these paintings, and so you can either believe it or not believe it. That's something part of the great mystery. The tensions and political situation around the world also does not help instill a sense of global security. Politics, too, may play a major role in how we embrace culture. A recent example of this came to light in Canada during the Conservative debates when Kelly Leitch, a few years back, suggested immigrants be screened for Canadian values. What are Canadian values? Anybody know? I got a lot of people scratching their heads. How do we describe ourselves? Of course, this left a lot of people scratching their heads as to what Canadian values were. And these values, good or historically distasteful, are what define our cultural integrity. And this filters down to the local level. Today, brain chatter. How many people, if you sit at a restaurant and you see a family there and they're on their phones? Nobody's talking. There's no conversation. Brain chatter. It fills us full of all the other things that culture doesn't. And for a moment, you have to visualize what life would be like without the things that are pleasurable, healing, educational, and vital to our identity. And I notice, talking with people, especially at shows that we do, and a lot of the YouTubers who are self-indulgent, doing all these solo trips and that. And it always surprises me that they're entertaining people, and people want to be entertained. They would rather be entertained than educated today, it seems. No museums, no art galleries or literature, no school choirs or small town festivals, or watershed protection initiatives like Beaver Valley. We would be left with a society bereft of character, just brain chatter. That's it. And today, culture is so inextricably entwined with the environment, as it has been for millennia, that there is a danger in visualizing the messages ensconced within the fabric of culture as entertainment only. Its deeper meaning often lost or ignored. Culture is one thing and varnish is another. So said Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American essayist, who believed we first have instincts and then we have opinions. I love this quote because it is fundamental to my talk tonight about the things concerning tourism that we don't understand, or the things we try to do or accomplish without circumspection, or perhaps the motivation to concentrate solely on how much money will this generate, or how many tourists can we attract if we do this. Incentives inspired to quantify rather than qualify. The varnish that often hides the fact that we don't really understand what it is we're trying to sell. The millennials, we've all heard that term a lot these days. What years does that include? Do we know that it's from 1981 to 1996. There's been a lot of talk about millennials, or Generation Y, children of baby boomers, as the new market to sell culture to. This is a generation searching for culture, so long as they look good wearing it. And if you look carefully at the demographic generalization that defines them as perhaps somewhat different from the previous generation, psychologists assert that millennials have an increased familiarity and use with communication, media, and digital technologies, are confident and tolerant. But they also have a sense of entitlement and narcissistic behavior that often leads to personality disorders, dependencies, and unemployment. That's a general, and I looked up a lot of psychological reports on millennials and how they sort of fit into the scope of things. It's not just my opinion to millennials. Am I married to one? Sorry. It has been the millennials that have molded and altered the way we look at the adventure trade. When we went from outdoor accoutrement purchased cheaply at army surplus stores and subdued colors that blended with nature, to whole industries pumping out expensive, albeit colorful clothing and equipment that ultimately created a new genre of outdoor enthusiasts, often more interested in how they looked, and the journey becomes incidental. I remember my first early years camping, and the best place to get a camping outfit was Hercules on Yonge Street, downtown Toronto. And we could go into the store and come out with a whole outfit, tents, army surplus pants, everything you needed for about $40. But everything, of course, I dressed the same way as I did back then. Everything blended with nature. And it's so changing. If you go to the Toronto Outdoor Adventure Show, which we have a booth there every year, and you look at all of that stuff, we didn't have stuff like that. We had cheap canvas tents with no floor or bug screen, and it was, and we cut spruce boughs for bedding. It was so a lot different today, for sure. So Canada, particularly the GTA, Montreal, and Vancouver, the major population centers, have become a multicultural blend of different nationalities, color, language, and religion, whereas the term wilderness, as it applies to certain forms of tourism, may not appeal to new Canadians, particular brands of cultural tourism. Even soft wilderness activities might be more acceptable. That's one thing that I run into a lot. And I've been I was a park ranger in Ontario for 8 years, and the government is still constantly trying to redefine what wilderness means. I mean, it has, religious connotations, it has political connotations, environmental connotations. I mean, you look at provincial parks now. I mean, you drive to these parks, everybody has to have Wi-Fi at these parks now because, and to some people living in the GTA, driving to a park, say Algonquin Park, that's wilderness to them. Or it could be a walk in Hyde Park in Toronto. For some, that's wilderness because a lot of these countries don't have forests that they can have trails through, like we have in Canada. So redefining wilderness, it's a tough shot because our business is in the middle of a wilderness park, and we fought for years to try to protect a much larger area than what we got, and we're still fighting logging companies in such a precious area as Temagami. But the government keeps wanting to redefine wilderness. They would love to, under the Ford government, would love to declassify wilderness into something else so they could get in there and log and mine. So that's just the way things are these days. Comparatively, our Aboriginal people were immersed in culture. It was part of their anthropological makeup that helped them survive. Their cultural conversation was alive and vibrant through their style of clothing, shared song and stories, a respect for the wisdom of elders through their art styles and cosmological beliefs. A pagan religion, yes, but with the belief that life is cyclical, not linear. All life was connected, and they had a symbiotic association with the natural world. Of course, some might think that all changed when white interlopers entered and started trading with cheap trinkets and muskets that would explode in their faces, and have smallpox embedded in Hudson's Bay blankets, that kind of thing. So trust, and I mean, we go back 400 years, trying to manipulate First Nations and telling them that we've got something better. One of Canada's most important cultural representations is its First People. Unfortunately, since Europeans landed on Canadian soil more than 4 centuries ago in a quest for riches, we have subjugated our Aboriginal population, resulting in mass cultural genocide. But we love to do things like this. What do we do with the dream catcher? Hang it on our rear view mirror. Where is it supposed to be? It's hung above your head to catch the bad dreams, right? But everybody wants one, everybody has one. And people are building inuksuks. Inuksuks is not part of our culture. We're taking them down all the time because paddlers love to build inuksuks along the shoreways. And it's not part of our culture. And it's an insult. I went down the Seal River, one of my first trips down the Seal River. There was only 2 groups down that river one year. And before that trip, I spent 3 days with 3 shamans in the village of Tuduli. We got, actually they had to extricate the elders and the children, women and children, because fires were encroaching on the village. So we had to leave. And when we got back, I got a call from the band, one of the bands, and they said, "Did you guys build all those inuksuks down the river?" I said, "No. We would not dare do that." It was another, I won't tell you the name of the company, the adventure company. But they had stopped and they built inuksuks all the way down Dene territory. And if you remember, if you look at the culture of the Dene and the Inuit, they were mortal enemies. And I remember a story when I was at the village, Tuduli, they laughed and they said, well, we had some kayakers come through and they landed in the plain in the village and they literally ran the half kilometer from the airstrip down to the lake and couldn't get away fast enough. And they had a couple of the elders cursing them as they ran with their kayaks over their shoulders, because that's what they do. That's what they did. That's part of their culture, is that they fought with the Inuit. And they thought, well, these kayaks, they must be Inuit. And anyway, I think whether it's a believable story or not, but there's still a bit of an animosity between certain First Nations groups. And this is where we have failed in Canada. Instead of embracing our First Nations culture, we have been obsessed with telling them that we have something better to offer. Yet we have no qualms about appropriating specific iconic objects like dream catchers or Inuit inuksuks, or take their language to brand our outdoor ventures. We are only just realizing the importance and value of Canada's Indigenous culture, but we need to bridge the gap of distrust. And of course, we've all heard of the residential schools, and that has been, Truth and Reconciliation has been certainly on the minds of politicians and planners, and how do we fix this problem with our First Nations? We relocated the Aboriginal people from their homeland territories to make it simpler for bureaucrats to manage and developers to use their wilderness resources. And a good case was with the Dene of Tuduli. They were moved to Churchill and almost decimated the band. They had a tent camp in the local dump, and on their own volition, they went back to scrape a living off of top of an esker, with no help from the Manitoba government, not until late 1970s. That was back in the 1950s. They relocated them simply because of mining interests along the river. They didn't want interference with the First Nations. And that happened a lot in Canada. Whale Cove is another example of a lot of these villages. Canada was forcing their original people to assimilate or perish. Good example here, 2 examples here. We look at Algonquin Park, our first provincial park in Ontario back in the late 1800s. A lot of people don't know that the Algonquins were not included in the Robinson-Huron Treaty. They were signed off by the Mississaugas from the GTA and completely forgotten. And they were omitted from the park, and they only fairly recently got some of their rights back to fish and hunt in some of their traditional territories. Quetico is an excellent example as well. the Lac LaCroix First Nations were kicked out of the park when they established the park, and were not allowed to come back and hunt and fish until the 1970s. So Ontario Parks has a bit of a dark history too. Things started to change in the 1970s, the decade of several movements: the women's movement striving for gender equality, the Native American movement, the environment movement. And all these movements that changed history also began to change the focus of our national culture, fixing all the things that were broken. The term ecology was first coined in 1866 by Ernst Haeckel, a German biologist and naturalist. It wasn't until the world environmental revolution of the 1970s that it became an understood or even recognized expression. Ecology refers to the study of the interrelationships between organisms in their exterior environment. It's also the study of flora and fauna in relation to each other and to their habitats. All life forms, including humankind, are intimately linked to the environment. The term ecotourism was first coined in 1983 by well-known Mexican conservationist and ecologist Hector Lascurain. It was quickly adopted by conservationists and tour operators. The rather loose concept has been around long enough now to determine what ecotourism actually embraces, how it works, and how it doesn't. It's a complex intellectual principle that attempts to characterize an activity, espouse a philosophy, and support a working model of sustainable development. Sustainable development, that's a catchword thrown around a lot these days. It's actually an oxymoron. A lot of the industrialists love that term. Bureaucrats and politicians love that term. Environmentalists find it very distasteful when it comes out. Multiple use of resources is another term that's thrown around a lot. Cut and run, like Temagami. A lot of places, if you start digging deeper, you'll find that, like Quetico, in the States in particular too, we're suffering through a lot of cut and run. Superior National Forest that was either burned over or logged out, and then they made it into a park. Ontario, Canada is doing the same thing, cut and run. We get what's left. In Europe, they were way ahead of us, and they're starting to rewild. It's called rewilding. They'll take some of these areas and they redevelop them into tourism destinations, etc. The relevance of ecotourism rests upon three assumptions. First, that ecotourism can promote and finance conservation. Second, ecotourism can promote and ecotourism can promote and finance economic development. And finally, ecotourism without a structured management archetype can destroy the resource it seeks to protect. Even as a trail builder, we build a lot of trails privately and for communities. One of the things we find a lot is that everybody wants trails these days, but if you don't build into your infrastructure and your budgets, maintenance and monitoring, it will fail. It happens a lot. However, we must be wary of the pitfalls associated with ecotourism development. Slick marketing language found in many travel brochures often misleads the traveler, and the product may have little or nothing to do with either conservation or economic growth. These new and evolving terms include nature tourism, adventure travel, self-propelled recreation, geotourism, and cultural tourism. All of these define one particular activity, although there is often a cross-pollination of one or more other brands of sustainable tourism. Anybody know where this is? It's the Hardiest. Famous place in Northern Ontario. It's one of the most beautiful places. Our lodge is right, well, it's not close to that, but this is Temagami, and it's only maybe half a kilometer from the town of Temagami. It's Sherman Mine, huge environmental disaster. These iron ore pits. But in the late 1980s, Canada also saw a clash between traditional culture and ecology. Politicians espoused the jobs versus the environment, we not mentioned that earlier, quandary, when in fact it was the old colonial attitude that promoted Canada as a land of inexhaustible resources. Canada's north is littered with over 500 extractive-based single industry ghost towns, and we can no longer afford to bail communities out that fail to diversify or change. And we had a lot of, in all the environmental battles that we've had in dealing with communities, industry towns, and one of the words that they absolutely detest is well, they don't like the word wilderness for one thing, and diversification is another. Like Temagami, it's a mining community, it always will be, it's a logging community. Well, tourism was actually there first, long before even logging. Classic examples where culture collides with ecological or environmental propriety are many. Examples in Magdalen Islands, that was out there during the seal hunt, doing undercover work with City TV in Toronto. And Temagami logging, preservation, and the greenbelts, another example of developing greenbelts. Again, that comes declassifying parks and protected areas. And we can thank the conservatives for that. And the Oak Ridges Moraine. I grew up on the Oak Ridges Moraine when I was going to high school in King City. And I used to swim in Bond Lake, and I used to run wild on the greenbelt. Henry David Thoreau. Everybody's heard of Henry David Thoreau, right? 19th century American philosopher. And he makes a bold point. He says, if a man walks in the woods for love of them half each day, he is in danger of being regarded as a loafer. I'm still a loafer. I'm 74 years old, and my parents would still call me a loafer. But if he spends his days as a speculator, shearing off those woods and making the earth bald before his time, he is deemed an industrious and enterprising citizen. Things haven't really changed that much since the 1800s. What has changed is hunting and fishing. Traditional forms of tourism are in the decline. Canada's Wildlife Federation surveys of the mid-1980s showed a marked decrease in traditional hunting and fishing. And it's primarily because of the stress on the game species and the proliferation of access roads. More access roads, more access to fish and game, more depletion. And just haven't figured that out yet. And poor management by the provincial governments. Not just Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they're all guilty. Beginning in the 1990s, ecotourism has been growing 20 to 34% per year. In 2004, nature-based ecotourism was growing 3 times faster than the tourism industry as a whole. Anybody ever been to a beach like this? Traditional sun and sand resort tourism has now matured as a market, and its growth is projected to remain flat. And when I was putting trails in for Red Leaves and JW Marriott, we had 700, well, almost 900 acres to build for a nature park, build trails. And we built trails, cross-country skiing, mountain biking, and backcountry hiking. But the developer who was developing the hotel and the village, is actually another, like a Blue Mountain type village called Red Leaves. He was a developer from the 1960s, and he built that as he would have built something in the 1960s. He had a lot, he had the spa, he had the docks, he had all the toys and the boats on the lake. But the draw, when they were trying to sell real estate for the hotel, for timeshares, it was the trails that attracted the people, mostly. Nothing else. The spa. What does that mean? Are you I can't, what? All right, we're almost done. In contrast, experiential tourism, which encompasses ecotourism, nature heritage, cultural and soft adventure tourism, as well as subsectors such as rural and community tourism, is among the sectors expected to grow most quickly over the next 2 decades. The United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and Conservation International have indicated that most of tourism's expansion is occurring in and around the world's remaining natural areas. And when you look at the tourism dollars spent, for example, 80% of money for all-inclusive package tours goes to airlines, hotels, and other international companies. It's 80%. In comparison, eco-lodges hire and purchase locally and put as much as 95% of money back into the local economy. More than 2/3 of US and Australian travelers and 90% of British tourists consider active protection of the environment and support of local communities to be a part of the marketing responsibility. And just how big is the tourism industry? Anybody know? How big is it? In 2024, tourism generated $10.9 trillion, or 10% of the global economy, and provided how many millions of jobs do you think that is? 357 million jobs in the tourism industry. It is also the fastest growing global industry at a rate of 6 to 10% annually. Anybody been on one of these ships? Andrea wants to go on one. It's full. There are certainly negative impacts of tourism, including ecotourism, when it doesn't adhere to ethical considerations. Aside from the ravages caused by climate change, there are 109 countries with coral reefs. Everybody knows what a coral reef is. 90 of them are being damaged by cruise ship anchors, sewage, and by tourists breaking off chunks of coral, including the commercial harvesting for sale to tourists. Cruise ships in the Caribbean are estimated to produce more than 70,000 tons of waste each year. It just goes right into the water, all of that waste off the ship. For those who enjoy a game of golf, an average 18-hole golf course soaks up at least 525,000 gallons of water each day. That's enough to supply the irrigation needs of 100 Malaysian farmers, not to mention the amount of pesticides and herbicides required to keep everything green. And we live right beside a wildlife sanctuary that rehabilitates animals. A lot of the animals, especially raccoons, are brought in from golf courses, and birth deformities, sick animals, all from pesticides from golf courses. As millennials mature, their self-absorbed tendencies may actually be a huge boon to the sustainable development of various brands of tourism. Millennials are health conscious and also aware of our fragile environment. The U.S. Real Estate Board indicates that more than 80% of new home buyers look for property close to protected areas, trails, and nature preserves. It can be assumed that in Canada it is comparable. The new genre of tourist, however labeled, searches for new avenues of pleasure, excitement, and enlightenment. They also demand honesty in marketing and a quality product that has been well honed and delivered. A couple of the negative things that we often come across too are the pictographs, names painted over, 1,000-year-old pictographs. And I was mapping out a river in northern Manitoba, the Grass River. There was a beautiful display of rock pictographs, and there were 2 names written across these from the local community. They worked out the mine. So I wanted to know the story. I talked to a local lodge owner, and he said, "Oh yeah, that story. You won't believe that story. We know the 2 guys that painted their names over the pictographs. Those 2 men died within a month, one in a mining accident and one in a car accident, just a month after they painted their names over the rock faces." So that's a bit of magic that we don't really understand the power behind some of these places. Whether you believe that story I couldn't disbelieve that story. And there's a lot of things that, that's part of the great mystery again. Garbage. 8 years as a canoe ranger in Temagami, we took out 3,000 bags of garbage. We flew it out, we paddled it out. Most of these sites were at motorboat accessible campsites, not so much the wilderness. Not to say the canoeists weren't guilty, they were just a little bit more devious in hiding garbage under stumps and logs and rocks and things like that. So that's still an issue, is that we, regardless of the brand, while satisfying tourists' interest may be a first priority, developmental pressures should be expected so that minimum levels are set to conserve or preserve the destination from saturation. And it's one of the things I did with my canoe books is that, for example, Temagami, there was only one park. It was a waterway park in the 1970s. It was busier in the 1970s than it is today with a larger wilderness park. My Temagami book, which is still one of my best-selling books, because it's such a popular area, the impetus for doing that guidebook was to spread the traffic out a much larger area, so it wasn't all in one core area. Not only that, it was to protect 5,000-year-old Nestogan trails. And the trails date back 5,000 years in Temagami. It's the oldest, still intact Aboriginal trail system in the world. And of course, logging companies were encroaching on all this, and they didn't care. They were at that time, in the 1970s, they were cutting over portage trails and cutting down right down to the lakesides. And that, go back there, I can go on and on about the environment battle, developing Maple Mountain, which kick-started the environment movement. And on a sacred mountain, Chibajing is a place where the soul spirit dwells, with an ancient burial ground for the Temiagama Anishinaabe people. Ontario wanted an Ontario Place North in 1972 and didn't have no contact with First Nations whatsoever. I know I'm getting off topic here. It might be a tired cliche, but people actually do love things to death. New tourism brands only work if there is an infrastructure of maintenance and protection built into them, something I mentioned. A good example where many communities and initiatives have failed is in the construction of trails. And trails are extremely important these days, not just because it keeps us employed. We build sustainable trails, and there's 20 different sciences involved in building sustainable trails. A lot of things, you don't just hand your guys a chainsaw and say, go cut a trail, which sometimes the government does when they send people out and cut trails. Grand Portage, famous trail, and it's used as a hiking trail today. Not so much by canoeists. Canoeists don't like long portages. They want to drive to wilderness. Trails are a part of our national heritage and culture. I've been building sustainable trails since I was a park ranger in Temagami back in the early 1980s. It was a time when there was no guidelines to protect old-growth forests, and logging companies in this province were pillaging forests at a rapacious rate, leaving some of the world's largest clear-cuts as seen by satellite images. We're guilty. Satellite images, we have the bigger clear-cuts than the rainforest in Brazil or other places. I began mapping out 5,000-year-old Aboriginal trails known in this province as the Nestogan or Onagum. And that's what I mentioned earlier. And it was at this point that I realized that our provincial and federal governments held little esteem for this very important facet of Canadian culture. Our first trails, or canoe routes that played such an important role in Canada's prehistory and post-contact era. And Andrew and I were contacted by Trans-Canada Trail, and everybody's familiar with the name Trans-Canada Trail. It's the world's longest trail. And they were in a hurry to get the trail done by Canada's 150th anniversary. But they conscripted us to map out one of the toughest sections across Canada. If you remember when they built the railroad, what was the hardest part building the railroad? Through the mountains, right? Through the Rocky Mountains. The second hardest place to build a railroad, do you know where that was? Northwest Ontario. So these guys sitting at a pub drinking beer thinking, let's build a cross-Canada land-based trail, which was okay if you've had 3 or 4 brew, not really thinking it through very, very well. But they came up to and says, well, what about a water trail? Hey, well, what is Canada's first trails? The Aboriginal trails were the first trails. Okay, so we pay respect to the nation's great trail. What better way to do it than a water trail? So, and we mapped out 1,250 kilometers of the Canada's trails. It's about 25% of the Trans-Canada Trail in Ontario. And it was tough. It was 4 years of heavy slugging, finding trails, clearing trails and campsites. And the hardest thing was working with communities, and everybody's got solutions, everybody's got opinions. And I was dealing with First Nations on a one-to-one basis, and they said, Hap, you go out and do the mapping and do the guidebook, we'll deal with the First Nations. So they walked in to meet with the elders, suits on, carrying briefcases, and of course, that ended the whole idea of support from First Nations. And anyway, it's a whole other, I could go on for hours about working with, anyway. Things are changing though slowly, and trails are being recognized worldwide, and in this country down to the local community level, as an integral cultural additive. The new genre of traveler, the millennial self-seeker, as well as the aging population of baby boomers, are exploring ways to improve their lives through fitness and cultural enlightenment. Historically, cultural amenities tended to be fixed places, and now art, music, literature, and music are moving outdoors into natural theaters, performances that blend with the natural world. And we're building, especially community trails. You get young people involved, taking art out onto the trail, carvings, and different forms of outdoor art. It's a great way to get people interested, especially young people interested in preservation and that cultural exchange. I was invited to New Zealand during the transition to winter from spring. It was in May, and I was a guest warden looking after one of the busiest trails. They knew I had wilderness survival, winter camping skills. So it was interesting. I learned a lot about international travel and how ill-prepared people are. People die on those trails. New Zealand spends millions on some of the best trails on the planet. And they found out the hard way. They had a school group on a deck overlooking a cliff, and it collapsed, and they all perished. It was a huge incident. Lawsuits and that. And it wasn't properly constructed, and that goes back to duty of care and looking at all the what-ifs, okay? And one thing as a trail builder, I know that once you move a rock, once you move a log, something on a trail, once you build something, if it's not maintained, there's a liability issue. And if that community, or if that resort, or even on your own property, for example, if somebody steps on a nail or breaks through a board on a boardwalk and injures themselves and they lose a foot or whatever, there's a lawsuit, potential lawsuit. And especially important for communities if they don't follow that duty of care. And anyway, a trail can take you places. Trails connect people, landscapes, and cultural resources. Trails can contribute significantly to a district's health, economy, education, and ultimately resource protection in a sustainable fashion. Trails provide opportunities for multi-use recreation, promoting physical activity to improve fitness and mental health. Trails offer opportunities to improve and test skills to be challenged, or to provide a sense of freedom, personal accomplishment, self-reliance, inspiration, and solitude. Like Thoreau, we need to sit at the edge of a small lake and be mesmerized by the naturalness of our surroundings. Think of culture as something that connects us with the environment 365 days of the year, not just a token appendage to monetary schemes, or as Waldo Emerson puts it, the varnish that masks something more vitally important. Culture reflects the deeper inner workings of an individual society. Canada is blossoming with a newfound vision that connects its people with the environment, an understanding of our historical shortcomings, and an appreciation for what we have as a society. To allow culture to flourish at the most local level, we have to be true to our beliefs, honest with our intentions and passions, passionate about protecting the land around us. And perhaps then, like our first people, culture will be much more than just a fixture. It will be the character that defines us, and that will become our destiny. Thank you for coming out. And again, thank Kate, Tim. And
We're going to have some time for questions. Anyone have any questions? There being none, I'll invite Rob Levity up to thank Hap.
Don't go away.
I'm not done yet.
Yeah, no. So, first of all, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Museum, established in 2013. 16 years you've been working to provide public outreach and public engagement. And this has been another great evening. So thank you to the Friends, the incredible work you do as volunteers. A particular thank you to Tim up there who's hiding. Yes, there we are, Tim, for presenting this, of course, to our online audience and ensuring that this is captured as a resource for people in years to come. I'd also like to thank the Middle Grey Arts and Heritage Organization for providing and saving this building for us. They were incorporated last year, March the 24th, as a not-for-profit corporation through the Ontario Historical Society. And since the pandemic in 2008, we've seen across Canada buildings like this destroyed and lost. This is an incredible historic building and a great cultural center that we should all be so proud of and cherish. And it's important for tourism also. And so congratulations to the board and what they're doing to repurpose and save this building. And to Hap, as an environmentalist, I got my first job, big job, as the executive director of the Coalition of the Niagara Escarpment. Canadian Environmental Law Association, Bruce Trail, Ontario Nature, many organizations came together to try and save the Niagara Escarpment and establish Canada's first environmental land use plan. And so in 1981, my first opportunity was I was invited to your callings up in Temagami about how to strategize and work together, because Temagami and places like the Beaver Valley are world-class, invaluable ecological resources. And we built huge friendships there, sharing strategies. And I think that inspiration I got in 1981 from young activists, I again got tonight from you. And thank you very much. I mean, I think there's so much to unpack tonight. Just a couple of things is, of course, why I think your key point there right in the beginning is ecotourism has to be believable. And we have to be true to our beliefs. And of course, why are we 40 years, 50 years later, still fighting these same battles? For example, to preserve your forests, the old growth, or in the Beaver Valley, to still fight constantly to protect the continuous natural corridors and the life of your lakes, and like our river, the Beaver River, which still has been brought back to life because of protection. But there's tremendous pressures, both at Temagami and in the Beaver Valley. And we talked earlier about the stripping away of all the regulations that we built up since 1965 in terms of conservation authorities and many, many other environmental regulations. And what impact does that have on ecotourism? Again, back to this issue. It's got to be believable. And so those battles carry on. And I think what you've done tonight, and we deeply appreciate, is you've given our local Beaver Valley Destination Stewardship group and the surrounding areas of the escarpment around the Beaver Valley a lot to think about and to unpackage and reflect on. And we deeply appreciate that. You've given us a lot of great ideas to think about, to prevent greenwashing, and to ensure that there is not varnishing across places like the Beaver Valley, and to protect the wildlife and the wilderness areas that we still have. I'm so glad that you're not driving back tonight, you and Andrea. You're going to be staying at the Penthouse, and you're going to have a great night of sleep. But I want you to know how much we deeply appreciate everything you've done over the last 40, 50 years to make this a more civilized and more decent place to live in Canada. So thank you very much.
I have to also, congratulate to my wife as well, because she is very much a part of what we do together as a team. So.
Thanks, Hap and Rob, for your ongoing support of our wild places and natural habitats. We have some door prizes, I believe, Steve. So I'll welcome Steve Planner from the Friends of the Museum to find who our winners are today. Pull out your tickets.
Now we have 4 prizes, so it's your choice. The first one wins. Gets to come up here and choose a prize. I'm going to say the last 4 numbers. 2032. There you go. Line up and choose your prize. You have 3 books and 1 gift certificate at Artemisia Cheese Shop.
And don't forget your books here from the prize winners for the, okay.
Was that you, the winner? Which one would you like? Would you like a book or a gift certificate? The books are. Oh, there you go. Rather than trying to reach over here, maybe. Thanks, Steve. I think you can go for on that if you want to get captive.
Kate wants to be a gopher. Oh my God. Kate, what are you doing?
The last 3 numbers?
Yeah.
041?
041.
041.
Going once? Going twice?
Well, there's not too many to choose from, so let's go for another one.
Your numbers, Dave? Okay.
033.
033?
033. I think there's some ghosts in this church. Something going on here.
034.
Getting closer.
Those two people must have left together. Oh, it's you? Okay.
034.
Need your notebook.
Very curious. Okay. Congratulations.
044.
Oh, very good. Last but not least.
Celebration of Henry moving forward.
037.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
So just to wrap up the evening, thanks, Hap. Oh, there's a microphone. A quick note before we can move into the foyer for coffee and some community time together, if it's not too late for everyone. The next speaker in the series will be Bob Henderson, who will speak on Thursday, May 21st. And I met Bob years ago when he came into the museum for a speaker series, and he's a very interesting listen. So again, thanks to Barry for a quick overview of Bob's talk next month. So one of Canada's best known outdoor personalities, Bob Henderson, Hap Wilson's much valued friend, is returning to Grey Highlands to headline the second program in May. Many will recall with pleasure Bob's previous appearances, including last year when he shared his almost lifelong Algonquin Park experiences. Widely traveled and internationally respected as an outdoor educator, Henderson's forthcoming presentation will take us out of Canada to Nepal. As together, through a new film, Anti-Expedition, co-produced by Bob and his wife, Margot, we will visit the distant, rugged, mountainous world of the Sherpas. Bob and Margot's travels in 2023 and the resulting film were inspired by an earlier but similar Norwegian expedition in 1971. Fortunately, for the price of a free will donation, we can all travel with Bob Henderson and experience the past and present of a very special place. Do join us on the evening of May 21st for what promises to be a most inspiring evening with Bob Henderson. Copies of his book, Ways to Go, Reconsidering Travel, will be on hand, and the author will be pleased to autograph copies. So you may be eager now to hit the book table and get Hap to sign copies of his books here tonight. So thanks for being a great audience. I'm Kate Russell for the Friends of the Museum, and we all look forward, feel free to linger, and we all look forward to seeing you again at our next speaker series in May. Have a great evening.